Isn't it crazy? Myron is blasting black creators for joking about Charlie Kirk's death. But when it comes to the actual killer who pulled the trigger, he suddenly goes quiet. Why defend jokes harder than murder? Let's break down this hypocrisy. I've been following the whole Charlie Kirk situation very closely, and it has honestly been fascinating, almost like watching a social experiment unfold in real time. The reactions, particularly from black content creators, have been so intense and varied that they reveal deeper truths about politics, identity, and loyalty in America. Some people, like Brandon Tatum, reacted with real emotion, even to the point of tears. And in Tatum's case, that makes sense. He wasn't just some distant admirer or a casual supporter of Kirk. He worked with him directly at Turning Point USA. That means he had an actual personal connection, a professional relationship, and probably even moments of mentorship or collaboration with Kirk. So, when Tatum broke down emotionally, it was believable because grief in that context is tied to shared experiences. It's similar to how someone might mourn a colleague or mentor, even if they didn't agree with them on every issue. The bond is real, and so is the loss. But then there are others, like Myron, whose responses ring hollow. His public display of grief comes across less like a genuine human reaction, and more like a performance staged for validation. That's where the deeper issue lies. Because it reveals how some black conservatives navigate their roles within predominantly white conservative spaces, instead of responding to Kirk's death with nuance, acknowledging the complicated legacy he left behind. They double down on proving loyalty to the conservative establishment, even if it means going harder against their own community than against the person who actually took Kirk's life. That raises an important question. Why is it easier for some to lash out at black critics than to confront the reality of white violence? What makes this all the more absurd is that the conflict itself, the war of ideas, happening within conservative politics, has nothing to do with the black community at all. This isn't about Democrats versus Republicans, liberals versus conservatives, or even black versus white. At its core, it's a struggle between two factions of the right, the extremists and the moderates. On one side, you have those who embrace hardline, uncompromising, sometimes authoritarian ideas. On the other, you have those who lean toward a more traditional, measured conservatism that still operates within the boundaries of mainstream politics. That's the real fight taking place, and it's not a fight the black community asked to join. Yet here we are, watching black commentators get pulled into the chaos, not because they have a stake in the battle, but because they feel pressure to prove where their loyalties lie. If you spend time on Twitter, or X, as it's now called, you can see this tension play out daily. Conservatives argue endlessly about foreign policy, particularly Israel and Palestine, with one camp framing unconditional support for Israel as a cornerstone of conservatism, while others criticize that stance as inconsistent with America First ideals. Then there are the debates over figures like Trump, DeSantis, or other rising stars in the Republican Party, where flip-flopping and accusations of betrayal are constant. The point is, the conservative movement is fractured, and these fractures have little to do with black voices. Yet, whenever tragedy strikes or controversy erupts, it's often black commentators who end up catching strays, or worse, being used as shields to protect conservative leaders from criticism. That's exactly what happened in the aftermath of Charlie Kirk's death. A number of black social media users, some serious and some simply trolling, made jokes or critical remarks about Kirk. Their reasoning wasn't hard to understand. Kirk had a long record of making dismissive or antagonistic statements about the black community. For many, his passing didn't feel like a loss. It felt like the removal of someone who had actively contributed to their marginalization. But instead of acknowledging that reality, or even respecting their right to express frustration, figures like Brandon Tatum and Myron rushed in to defend Kirk's honor as though mocking him was a crime worse than the act that ended his life. And that's where the hypocrisy becomes glaring. Think about it. The actual killer, Austin Robinson, is the one responsible for Kirk's death, yet the outrage directed at him was minimal compared to the vitriol unleashed on black commentators who dared to speak ill of the dead. Myron, for example, spent his energy roasting a black woman for her comments instead of calling out Robinson, the white man who pulled the trigger. That choice is telling. It highlights the unspoken rules of conservative politics. You can attack liberals, criticize immigrants, mock LGBTQ communities, and, above all, take shots at black people without much consequence. But when it comes to holding white conservatives accountable, especially white extremists, there's a line you cannot cross. To cross it would mean risking your standing in those circles, and for some, maintaining that acceptance is more important than speaking truth. This imbalance reflects a kind of conditioning, one that stretches back generations. Black people in America have been taught explicitly and implicitly that we must always show compassion and sensitivity to white suffering. Even when it isn't reciprocated, when harm befalls a white person, especially someone of prominence, we are expected to mourn, to sympathize, to set aside our grievances. But when the reverse happens, when Black lives are lost or when we're disrespected, that same level of empathy rarely comes our way. Myron's reaction is a textbook example of this conditioning at work. Instead of prioritizing justice or accountability, he prioritized appeasement. Now, it's important to note that not every Black conservative falls into this pattern. There are commentators who have carved out independent platforms, who speak their minds freely without fear of losing favor in white conservative spaces. People like Tariq Nasheed, for example, may not enjoy the same financial backing or institutional support, but their voices are supported directly by their communities. That independence allows them to call out hypocrisy wherever they see it. Whether it's in liberal circles, conservative circles, or within the Black community itself, the trade-off is clear. You may not have the same access to mainstream conservative audiences, but what you do have is authenticity, autonomy, and the respect of the people you represent. In contrast, Munn started off with strong support from the Black community. He had his own platform, his own money, and his own following. He didn't need to bend to anyone. Yet over time, the desire to impress and gain acceptance from the white conservative establishment pulled him away from that foundation. Instead of building a legacy rooted in independence, he chose a path of validation, which has left him in a position where he does the dirty work of attacking other Black people while protecting those who see him as expendable. That's the saddest part. He gave up something real and self-sustaining for something superficial and conditional. When you step back and look at the entire situation, the pattern becomes clear. Charlie Kirk's death, tragic as it may be, exposed the fault lines not only within conservative politics, but also within the dynamics of race and loyalty in America. The conservative movement is fractured, with moderates and extremists at war with each other. Yet, instead of addressing that internal conflict, many would rather point fingers at Black voices for daring to speak honestly. The real issue isn't that people made jokes about Kirk, it's that those jokes revealed a truth conservatives don't want to face. That their leaders aren't universally admired, and that their own communities are turning on them. So when we see figures like Myron performing grief, attacking Black women, and showing more anger at commentary than at the actual shooter, what we're really seeing is fear. Fear of losing standing, fear of upsetting white conservatives, fear of stepping out of line, and fear, when it drives your actions, makes your loyalty look less like conviction and more like submission. That's why this whole episode matters. It isn't just about Charlie Kirk, Brandon Tatum, or Myron. It's about the larger question of who we choose to hold accountable, and why.
And then you got this fat right here, dancing, as he dies. After he died, call him a deadbeat dad. You fat with your fake hair, guaranteed you're probably gonna get diabetes, like every other Black, because you drink too much goddamn Kool-Aid.
When you look at how Myron handled the Charlie Kirk situation, the double standard is impossible to ignore. He hurled insults at a Black woman for mocking Kirk's death, yet showed almost no outrage toward the actual killer, Austin Robinson, a white man later arrested in Utah after confessing to his father, a longtime deputy who urged him to turn himself in. Myron reacted with shock and pity for the killer's honest family, but saved his venom for Black voices online, proving he and others like him reserve their harshest words for their own community while avoiding direct criticism of whites. The unwritten rule in conservative spaces is clear: you can bash liberals, mock certain groups, and endlessly police Black people, but calling out whites, especially white conservatives, is off limits. If Robinson had been Black, the uproar would have been deafening. Yet because he was white, figures like Myron, Brandon Tatum, and others who once criticized Kirk suddenly became his most loyal defenders, crying publicly while staying silent about the man who actually pulled the trigger. That silence exposes the power dynamic at play. Instead of building independence like commentators who are supported by their own community, Myron chose to trade autonomy for validation from white conservatives, attacking Black critics while protecting the very system that marginalizes him. And that, at its core, is the hypocrisy. Black conservatives waging war against their own while showing deference to the white extremists who undermine them, leaving their loyalty looking more like fear and submission than genuine conviction. Right now, conservatives are locked in what can only be described as a civil war of ideas. a messy and very public clash between moderates and extremists that looks almost identical to the infighting we've seen among liberals for years. On one side, you have the moderate conservatives, the ones who still cling to the idea of traditional politics, compromise, and mainstream respectability. On the other, you've got the extremists, the hardliners who don't believe in playing the political game politely and want to reshape the movement around raw ideology, nationalism, and a kind of unfiltered aggression. And the truth is, both camps are tearing each other apart while trying to present a united front to the outside world. It's almost comical, like watching two siblings fight viciously in the back room, only to step outside pretending everything is perfect. But beneath that performance, there's a shared resentment that never seems to go away. And a lot of that resentment, whether people admit it or not, tends up getting projected onto black people. The irony in the Charlie Kirk case is almost too much to bear. Here you have a man who built his career preaching to conservatives, attacking the left, and claiming to be a warrior for his cause. And yet, he wasn't taken out by liberals, Democrats, Antifa, or any of the so-called enemies he spent his career railing against. He was killed by someone in his own orbit, a white man who came from the very community Kirk represented. That's the brutal truth. Kirk's demise wasn't the result of outside opposition. It was the result of internal decay, a crack within his own camp. And instead of acknowledging that, instead of turning their attention toward the uncomfortable reality that their own side produced, the person who pulled the trigger, figures like Myron have chosen to redirect the conversation. They've decided it's easier to go after black commentators who made jokes or critical remarks about Kirk than to grapple with the fact that the call was coming from inside the house. That's what makes Myron's antics so disturbing to watch. The way he goes about performing grief, pandering to his audience, and humiliating himself just to prove loyalty. It's sickening because it exposes how deeply some of this conditioning runs. He wasn't showing fire at the killer, Austin Robinson. He wasn't demanding accountability or questioning how a man so close ideologically to Kirk could turn on him. No, his energy was focused on tearing down a black woman online, roasting her for daring to laugh, and dragging other black commentators who didn't fall in line with the narrative of mourning. It's like he was saying, the real enemy isn't the guy who pulled the trigger. It's you, my own people, for not showing the proper sympathy. And that mindset is more dangerous than people realize because it teaches us that the hierarchy of empathy is upside down. For decades, black people have been conditioned to treat white suffering as sacred, no matter how much disdain white conservatives show us. No matter how dismissive or even outright hostile their rhetoric can be toward the black community. When harm comes their way, we're expected to soften our tone, quiet our critiques, and mourn alongside them. The unwritten rule is, their pain matters more than yours. You can see it in the way the media covers tragedies, in the way politicians speak about certain victims, and in the way ordinary people react on social media. When something happens to us, when black people are gunned down, marginalized, or ridiculed, the sympathy is often muted or non. At best, it's conditional. But when the shoe is on the other foot, suddenly everyone is expected to fall in line, express sorrow, and avoid even the slightest hint of disrespect. That double standard isn't just hypocrisy, it's a form of control. And here's where the real victory of conditioning comes in. It's not just that white conservatives expect us to care about their pain while dismissing ours. It's that so many of us actually do it. We've been trained, over centuries, to see their suffering as more legitimate, more worthy of empathy, than our own. That's why you see people like Myron crying, defending, and lashing out on behalf of a man like Charlie Kirk. Even though Kirk himself spent years making dismissive comments about the very communities Myron comes from, it's the same kind of conditioning you see in workplaces, where black employees will go out of their way to avoid making white colleagues uncomfortable, even when those same colleagues have no problem saying or doing things that make them uncomfortable. It's a dynamic of submission, and it's been baked into the culture so deeply that people perform it without even realizing what they're doing. But let's really sit with the irony. Charlie Kirk wasn't a universally beloved figure. He wasn't a neutral commentator who never offended anyone. He was a polarizing figure who built his platform on division, and who wasn't shy about his criticisms of marginalized communities, including black people. For many in our community, his passing didn't stir grief, stirred indifference, even a sense of cosmic irony. And yet, instead of respecting that reaction as valid, instead of acknowledging that Kirk's words and actions shaped how people felt about him, the pressure was immediately placed on black people to show respect. That's the conditioning in action. No matter what was said about you, no matter what harm was done, you must remain sensitive to their loss. Meanwhile, look at the reverse. How often do you see mainstream conservative figures shedding tears when tragedy hits our communities? How often do you see them speak with reverence when a prominent black leader passes away? In fact, more often than not, you'll hear them downplaying it, mocking it, or shifting blame back onto us. They don't extend the same courtesy they demand from us, and yet people like Myron still bend over backward to deliver it. That contradiction isn't just frustrating, it's heartbreaking. Because it shows how fear drives loyalty. Fear of losing standing in conservative spaces, fear of losing access to platforms, donors, or audiences, fear of being labeled disloyal or radical if you speak the truth. And when fear drives your actions, your loyalty stops looking like conviction and starts looking like submission. That's why Myron's behavior feels less like genuine grief, and more like an act of survival or performance meant to reassure his conservative peers that he knows his place. The saddest part is, it doesn't have to be this way. There are black commentators who've built their platforms without bowing down to white conservative approval. They may not have the same financial backing, but they have autonomy. They can criticize any one liberal, conservative, black, or white without worrying about losing their seat at the table. That's the power of independence, and it's something Myron once had. But now, instead of leading from a place of strength, he finds himself tap dancing for approval, attacking his own people, and protecting the very individuals who see him as expendable. At the end of the day, the Charlie Kirk situation revealed more than just the divisions within conservatism. It revealed the ongoing struggle for dignity and self-respect within black conservatism itself. Because, when you choose to cry for those who wouldn't cry for you, when you choose to attack your own while sparing those who harm you, you're not really fighting for ideas, you're fighting for validation. And validation is fleeting. And with that, family, you already know what time it is. It's your boy O'Shea Duke Jackson, back at it again with the celebrity junk. Appreciate y'all for rocking with me. Keep hitting that like button, grab that notification bell so you don't miss a drop, and as always, we out.